Hello everyone, welcome to The View on Africa. My name is Dr. Akinola Olojo. I'm a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, and I work with colleagues in a program that focuses on transnational threats and international crime. So today we shall be looking at Nigeria's presidential election and the question of security, but we'll try to fine-tune our focus on the context of countering terrorism in the country. We shall look at two aspects. We look at the challenges which have confronted the President Buhari administration over the last 4 years, and then we shall look at the measures or some measures that can be put in place in view of a new administration. Now, we all know that Nigeria's presidential election was supposed to hold on the 16th of February. But it was postponed, unfortunately. And while that is the case, one thing which we cannot do is to postpone the problems or the security challenges that face the country. And whoever becomes the president, the new administration, come 23rd of February when elections hold, would have to inherit these problems which we are about to discuss. So I'll try to weave the conversation, the two aspects of the discussion together. So I'll mention some of these challenges and also suggest some of the things which can be done by a new leadership. Now, the first thing which a new administration will need to recognize is the distinct threats posed by Boko Haram and its breakaway faction, the Islamic State West Africa province. We all recall that back in March 2015, Boko Haram pledged allegiance to the so-called Islamic State. And in August 2016, the group splintered, and we had a new faction led by someone called Abu Musab al-Banawi, which calls itself the Islamic State West Africa province. Now, this particular faction appears to be more closely aligned with the so-called Islamic State. And we find that we've seen back-to-back attacks since July 2018, and even more recently, a number of incidents, which have targeted the military. We've seen army bases affected. We've seen troops on the ground killed. We've seen patrol teams also assaulted. We've also seen, of course, the faction led by Abubakar Shekau, which has also launched a number of attacks in various communities. Now, it is important for Nigeria's leadership to understand not only the methods of attacks, but also the nature of recruitment, the transnational ties, which I hinted at earlier, and also the rapport with civilians, especially in the case of the Islamic State West Africa province. So understanding these dynamics will help to inform a more effective operational response by the Nigerian government. A second or related issue to this is the fact that the Global Terrorism Index, the latest report, actually listed Boko Haram as one of the 4 deadliest terror groups globally. So we have 3 other ones, including the Taliban, Al-Shabaab, and of course Daesh. We've also seen the African Center for Strategic Studies, making a note of how the Islamic State West Africa province more than tripled, the number of incidents it was linked to in 2018 compared to the preceding year. We've seen also data suggesting how nearly 60% of the fatalities, have been the case when it comes to the Islamic State West Africa province. And when you compare, the fatalities of 2018 to 2017. So these are very serious issues which any new administration, whoever will lead it, will have to address and really understand. Now, a second important concern has to do with human rights issues when it comes to countering terrorism. We know that very recently, Nigeria has been in the spotlight of Human Rights Watch. We've seen terror trials as far back as October 2017. We've also seen subsequent ones in February and July 2018. Some of these trials, especially the conditions under which they were conducted, as well as the outcomes. And those involved, a number of issues have been raised and called to question regarding, these trials. And, we must bear in mind that the criminal justice context of this whole campaign against terrorism or against Boko Haram is one which cannot be taken lightly. We know that back in September 2017, the UNDP report published at the time actually noted that around 71% of individuals in Africa who join Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab actually do so because of the actions of governments. Some of them join also because of a family member who was killed or arrested. These are the things which push people to join. We also know that Nigeria must provide leadership, bearing in mind the fact that Nigeria co-chairs the Criminal Justice and Rule of Law Working Group of the Global Counterterrorism Forum. This is something which really, draws attention to the need for Nigeria to show leadership and a good example. A third area of concern, which the new administration would have to deal with, relates to the setbacks and the challenges that have affected the military. Like I mentioned earlier, we've seen a number of attacks, escalated over the last couple of months against the military. And we've also seen protests by some troops regarding overextended periods on the front lines. We've seen cases of some troops also lamenting about obsolete weapons and even inadequate weaponry, to be able to deal with the insurgency. These are very serious concerns, and it's something which must really be investigated by the leadership of Nigeria. These are things which also call to mind the fact that it's not just a military struggle, but then as far as the use of force is concerned, these are things which must be looked into. There must be accountability, mechanisms put in place to ensure that fiscal accountability of the military is ensured. A fourth area has to do with the role of the private sector. We know that according to the UN Security Council resolutions 2395 and 2396, there is emphasis on the need to engage more deeply private sector entities. Member states need to act more cooperatively with them, especially when it comes to issues of effective border management with the Lake Chad Basin countries, for instance. When it comes to providing technological solutions, when it comes to things like intelligence gathering, these are very important aspects which have affected the counterterrorism campaign in the northeast of Nigeria. Now, we know that the scale of the humanitarian crisis in the country has actually elicited a number of responses from some private sector players, such as the Aliko Dangote Foundation. We've seen them help IDPs, pump in some funds to be able to rebuild communities, but that is not enough. We need to go beyond that and try to operationalize some of these United Nations Security Council resolutions that call for, a wider spectrum of engagement and actors in regard to this. Private sector entities can also shape, this whole campaign when it comes to reintegration issues. We know that there have been a number of reintegration programs in the country, and some of these private sector entities can help to help facilitate socioeconomic services, the provision of these services, when it comes to job placements, when it comes to trainings, and a number of other things. So these are very important as well. We have also seen in a fifth area, and I think this is where things are, have become, it's become very important to begin to rethink the approach or the strategy of Nigeria in countering Boko Haram. We're speaking about the role of dialogue. We need to come to terms with the fact that the use of force is not sufficient. While, of course, you have the military playing its own role, you have this whole issue about criminal justice, but again, you also have the potential use of dialogue to complement all these approaches. We do know that there is some evidence from the past, especially from 2011 and 2012, there were attempts by the Nigerian government at the time to try and engage Boko Haram in talks. But of course, these efforts did not really see the light of day. But we also know that as we speak, there are early stages of talks between the US and the Taliban. And we know that even though these are still it might be very premature to make conclusions about this, but the fact is that even the Taliban itself has been listed as the second deadliest terror group globally, even more in terms of fatalities and attacks compared to other terror groups. But we see that there are, evident, that certain, there's a certain degree of talks taking place, and it shows that something is possible in this direction. There might be a need to begin to systematically explore this option and to reflect on the possibility of complementing this with the use of force. There might be a need to engage local society, local community actors and civil society organizations, or even perhaps trusted governments in this whole process. It's much more complicated now. The crisis is much more complex. There are very sensitive issues involved. The issue of timing is very key. The context matters. And also, a number of things which need to be considered. But, the more we have this rigidity in terms of the stance of not speaking with, terrorists, quote and unquote, this is something which prevents any exploration of this option in the first place. So these are just a number of things which have been witnessed over the last 4 years with the President Buhari administration. It dates even, before that period. And these are things which we cannot postpone. Whoever becomes Nigeria's president will inherit these challenges and will need to begin to deal with them or address these problems. Nigeria's election has been rescheduled for the 23rd of February. And when eventually a new leader is elected, these are the things which will need to be considered. And the election presents another opportunity for Nigeria to try and begin to get counterterrorism right. Thank you very much.